Hi, my name is Perry Chase, and today I want to talk to you about working with fear. Working with fear. So, what is fear? Um, I think we notice fear mostly, or I do anyway, when I find myself avoiding something or really resistant to something. I do a lot of work with resistance. It's sort of like one of the things that I've spent a lot of time studying in myself and clients and others over the last couple of years. And I look at sort of what is resistance and what's behind it. And in anyone, particularly on the business side of things, when you want to do more or go bigger, or you like, why can't I make money? Things that you avoid, you hold on to things that are taking your energy away from the way you could be producing. Usually, there's either some kind of belief there that's blocking you, or fear. So when we talk about limiting beliefs, it's just that you may not see, like you might only see, in order to get from point A to point B, I need to walk down this road. And right now that road is blocked and you're like stuck because you can't see that you might be able to climb the wall, or that there's another way around, or whatnot. So that's like where limiting beliefs block us, where we just literally can't see the possibility. I want to add that that actually is one of the things that also leads to depression. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I just want to put that out there. So not medically responsible for this information. But in my opinion, on a spiritual level, it's also what leads to suicidal ideation, because the ego has an idea of the way things are supposed to be. And if it can't see, you end up, your brain like short circuits in a loop, and you can't figure out how to get out. And so that's when people end up like depressed, and that's how they end up going down. So my opinion, okay, not medical information. But then on the fear level, so I've been working a lot with my own fear lately, and particularly these places where we avoid. Like avoidance is this form of resistance where we just don't want to look at the thing. We just kind of put it off to the side. But if you have ever avoided something, which I'm pretty sure that you have, because we all have, there is, that's Oscar, by the way. There's something that avoidance, like there's always something underneath the avoidance. So if you feel yourself avoiding, and this is what I do, I say to myself, okay, why am I avoiding? And by the way, if you've watched any of my other videos, avoidance also has a sensation to it. It has this sort of tightness. It has this sort of like, I don't want to look at this. It can have some overwhelm, and that goes back to the idea that you can't see out of the box you're in, right? So like your head gets heavy, you might feel sleepy. There's all these kinds of sensations that are associated with avoidance. So if you can stop and say, okay, I'm avoiding that. Why am I avoiding that? What would happen? What am I trying to manage? What am I trying to, what outcome am I not in approval of as a possibility, and therefore I don't want to look at it or deal with it? So there are a couple of things that I see when you're looking at fear-based patterns, and particularly when it comes to avoidance. And one is we actually stay a little bit in fantasy, meaning that if I don't look at that and I don't have to see the reality of that, I can continue to believe whatever story it is that I am holding on to right now. That could be a good story or a bad story. Like for instance, let me give you a really good example. People that don't go to the doctor, right? So if you don't go to the doctor and like something's kind of wrong with you and you're like, nah, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't want to know what's happening because then I'll have to deal with it, right? So it's like you would rather stay in the fantasy that everything is fine and you just don't know. And there are lots of ways that this comes up in life, right? So there's a fear of knowing. There's a fear of something changing or being different. And therefore, we're just going to like put it over there and we're not going to look at it. The second piece that's part of that ends up being, and I see this a lot, is if I deal with this that's over here, this thing that I'm avoiding, then I am going to have to be responsible for it. Because once you know, then you have to actually deal with it, right? If you don't know, then it's not your problem, right? But if you do know, then you actually have to deal with it. And this is where I think people get really paralyzed. And I know that it happens to me, which is that if you avoid something long enough, it feels so big, right? It feels so enormous that like you don't even know where to start because the idea of dealing with something feels overwhelming and paralyzing. And I know that I felt this way when I shut down my startup, making the decision of like what to do and like to talk to my investors and my customers. I mean, it just felt so big that I just didn't want to deal with it. I couldn't just say like, this is what I want to do. It was so big for me. And I would say this is where I pull in the word surrender, because this is where you kind of have to get into alignment with whatever is going to happen. Because eventually, if you keep avoiding things, then usually the outcome is worse than if you had dealt with it. So one of the things that I have learned in this situation is that as long as you're communicating, you are good. Meaning everything can be handled. Everything is worked out. Everything is dealable if you can just go one step at a time and communicate one thing at a time. And I think that piece of communication is where people get, like, if you're not connecting and communicating in reality, you further get stuck in your hallucination of what could be, and then it actually feels bigger. But when you have the conversation or you communicate, it's usually not as big a deal. You've made it into a much bigger thing than it actually is. What I also think is interesting is with that, it's also like, am I using this avoidance? Am I using this? So it takes a lot of energy to hold an avoidance, meaning the amount of mental space that it requires for you to actively ignore something. Have you ever been to a party? You know, you go to a party and you're like, I fucking hate that person. And you're like, I am not speaking to them. And you end up spending the whole night being like, I'm not speaking to them. I'm not speaking to them, right? And that takes a lot of energy. It takes so much energy to ignore someone or not like them. And, you know, it's funny, but like that is actually an energy suck that you could be using for something else. So if you're avoiding something, you look at all the things in your life that you're avoiding, it's actually stealing all your energy. And you know, if you listen to my work, that's what I care about, energy efficiency. So there's that. And then on like one level deeper than all of that is sort of like the deeper thing of Like, what am I managing? And I noticed something that I was avoiding recently, and I was like, what is that? What am I avoiding? And it's like, oh, I'm afraid that if I deal with this situation, that there could be loss in this for me. And so if there's loss, then I'll have to go through the pain of losing something. And then what did that thing that I might be losing mean to me or mean about me? And if I didn't have it, what would that mean? And so it's sort of looking at the entire multiple layer of that. And then once I was able to see what was at the bottom of that, and I could get in alignment with like, hey, if that is the worst case scenario of what could happen, you know what? I can handle it. And if I can handle it, then I can take a step forward to deal with it. So if you're dealing with fear and avoidance, these are some of the mechanisms and questions that I use for myself, and hopefully you find this helpful, to kind of help you process avoidance and fear. So with that, I will leave you. Have a great day.